How may I come by this art? And thus I have briefly considered these things. But the main question that I would have resolved is, how may I come by this art? What way shall I take to be a fisher of men? Or how may I order and set the net, that it may bring in souls to God? This, the great master of assemblies, sets down in the first part of the verse. Observe, O my soul, that the way for me to be a fisher of men is to follow Christ. Show me what it is to follow thee, O Lord, and Lord, help me to do it. Here, two things are to be considered. Roman numeral number 1. What following Christ imposes and implies. Roman numeral number 2. Wherein Christ is to be followed. What following Christ supposes and implies. Roman numeral 1. What following Christ supposes and implies. First, it presupposes life. A dead man cannot follow any person. A dead preacher cannot follow Christ. There must be a principle of life, spiritual life in him, or else he is not. Therefore have I said and maintained that a man cannot be a minister in foro Dei, though he may be in foro Ecclesiae, without grace in his heart. This is a spiritual following of Christ, and therefore presupposes a spiritual and heavenly principle. Tell me then, O my soul, what state art thou in? Thou wast once dead, that is sure, dead in trespasses and sins, Ephesians 2 verse 1. Art thou raised out of thy grave? Hast thou got a part in the first resurrection? Has Christ breathed on thy dead and dry bones? Or art thou yet void of spiritual life? Art thou rotting away in thine iniquity? What sayest thou to this? If thou be yet dead, thy case is lamentable. But if thou be alive, what signs of life are there to be seen in thee? I have my own doubts of this because of the prevailing of corruption. Therefore, I will see what I can say to this. Number 1, that a man that hath the Spirit hath life. Romans 8, verses 2 and 9. But I think I have the Spirit, ergo, I have life. That I have the Spirit, I conclude from these grounds following. Letter A. I have light that sometimes I had not. The Comforter shall teach you all things, and bring all things to your remembrance, whatsoever I have said unto you. John 14, verse 26. I see now otherwise than sometimes I saw. Once I was blind, but now I can see, though I see but men as trees. Once I was darkness, but now I am light, though weak, in the Lord. This light makes me see. Number 1, my former darkness, the sad and miserable state that I once was in, ignorant of God, Christ, and religion, save going to the church and keeping from banning and swearing and so forth, which I was restrained from a child. This makes me see my present darkness, 1 Corinthians 13, verse 12. How little a portion do I know of thee, O God? My knowledge is but as the twilight. Number 2, it lets me see my heart sins, my imperfections, and shortcomings in the best of my duties, so that God might damn me for them. The hypocrites say, why have we fasted, and thou seest not? Isaiah 58, verse 3. It lets me see the wanderings of my heart in duty and out of duty, yea, the sinfulness of the first risings of lust in mine heart, Romans 7, and is still discovering the baseness of my heart unto me, so that I am forced to think and say that at the best I am unclean, unclean. Number 3, it makes me to see Christ precious. 1 Peter 2 verse 7. Altogether lovely, the chief among 10,000, preferable to all the world, for whom, if my heart deceive me not, and Lord thou knowest, I would undergo the loss of that which I most esteem in the world. Whom have I in heaven but thee? And there is none on earth that I desire besides thee. For indeed, my heart and flesh faints and fails, but thou art the strength of my heart, O Lord. Psalm 73, verses 25 through 26. Number 4, it lets me see my need of him, so that nothing else but Christ, I am persuaded, can help me. When I have done what I can, I am but an unprofitable servant. If I should do 1,000 times more than I do, I count all but loss and dung for the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ my Lord. My soul cries out for thee, O God, and follows hard after thee. Number 5, the knowledge that I have of Christ makes me trust in him in some measure. Psalm 9 verse 10. Though, alas, my evil heart of unbelief creates a great deal of difficulty in that to me. I find him a present help in the time of trouble. Therefore I endeavor to cast my burden upon him. I know him to be a good master, and therefore I lean on him for help for his own work. I know his grace is sufficient for me. Therefore in temptation and trials I endeavor to lift up my soul to him. Letter B. I feel help in duty from the Spirit. I know not what I should pray for, but the Spirit helpeth my infirmities. Romans 8 verse 26. Many times I have gone to prayer very dead, and have come away with life. I have gone with a drooping and fainting heart, and come away rejoicing, with a heart closed, and have come away with a heart enlarged, and have felt enlargement both as to words and affections, and this hath made me both thankful and more vile in mine own eyes, that God should have done so with the likes of me. 1 Chronicles 29 verse 14. Number 2, he that hath sense and feeling hath life, but I have sense and feeling, ergo I have life. Ephesians 4:19. My sins are a burden to me. Matthew 11 verse 28. Lord, thou knowest my omissions and commissions, the sins of my thoughts and of my life, the sins of my youth, and above all, that which is my daily trouble, and evil, backsliding, and base heart, which I find deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Jeremiah 17 verse 9. This body of sin and death makes me to groan and long to be rid of it. Romans 7 verse 24. And what a load it was to me this day, God knows. I feel God's presence, which makes me to rejoice sometimes. At other times, I feel his absence. Though, O Lord, hidest thy face, and I am troubled. Psalm 30 verse 7. His smiles are sweet as honey from the comb, and his frowns are as bitter as death to my soul. Number 3, he in whom there is heat hath life, but I have heat in my soul, ergo I have life. I find a threefold flame, though weak, in my heart. Letter A, a flame of love to Christ, Romans 5 verse 5. My soul loves him above all, and I have felt my love to Christ more vigorous within this short while than for a considerable time before. Lord, put fuel to this flame. I have a love to his truths that I know, what God reveals to me of his word. Psalm 119, verse 19. I find sometimes his word sweeter to me than honey from the comb. Psalm 19, verse 10. It comforts and supports me. I cannot but love it. It stirs me up and quickens my soul when dead. I love his commands, though striking against my corruptions. Romans 7, verse 22. I love the promises as sweet cordials to a fainting soul, as life from the dead to one trodden underfoot by the apprehensions of wrath or the prevailing of corruption. I love his threatenings as most just. My soul heartily approves them. If any man love not the Lord Jesus, let him be anathema, Marantha. The least part of truth that God makes known to me, I love, and by grace would endeavor to adhere to. I love those in whom the image of God does appear. Though otherwise mean and contemptible, my heart warms towards them. 1 John 3, verse 14. I love his work, and am glad when it thrives. Romans 1, verse 8. Though, alas, there is little ground for such gladness now. I love his ordinances. Psalm 84, verse 1. And what bears his stamp, though all this be but weak, I love his glory, that he should be glorified. Come of me what will. Letter B. I find in my heart a flame of desires after the righteousness of Christ. Matthew 5, verse 6. Number 1. After the righteousness of Christ. My soul earnestly desires to be stripped naked of my own righteousness, which is as rags, and to be clothed and adorned with the robe of his righteousness. This wedding garment my soul affects, so shall I be found without spot, when the master of the feast comes in to see the guests. My soul is satisfied and acquiesces in justification by an imputed righteousness, although, alas, my base heart would fain have a homespun garment of its own sometimes. Second, after communion with him, Psalm 42, verse 1. When I want it, my soul, though sometimes careless, yet at other times cries out, "Oh, that I knew where I might find him." I have found much sweetness in communion with God, especially at the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, in prayer and meditation, hearing the word faithfully and seriously preached, and in preaching it myself when the candle of the Lord shines on my tabernacle. Then was it a sweet exercise to my soul. I endeavor to keep it up when I have it, by watching over my heart and setting up exclamations to God. When I want it, I cry to him for it, though alas, I have been a long time very careless. Sometimes my soul longs for the day when my minority shall be overpast, and I be entered heir to the inheritance, incorruptible, undefiled, and that fadeth not away, to be quit of this evil world, to be dissolved, and to be with Christ, which is best of all, especially at 3 times. The first time, when I get more than ordinarily near to God, when my soul is satisfied as with marrow and fat, and when my heart is nobiliated and tramples on the world. The second one, when I am wrestling and groaning under the body of sin and death, the evil heart, then fain would I be there, where Satan cannot tempt and sin cannot enter. Yea, when I have been much forsaken, at least as to comfort. Diary, August 2nd, 1696. Where is the most eminent instance of it? In the third one, when I preach and see the gospel hath not success, but people are unconcerned and go on in their abominations. The third part, or number 3, I find in my heart some heat of zeal for God, which vents itself. Little Roman numeral 1. By endeavoring to be active for God in my station. So when I was at K, I endeavored to do something for God, though alas, it did some of them no good. Before I entered on trials, one main motive was to have opportunity to give a testimony against sin, and to see if I could be an instrument to reclaim my soul from their wicked way. This I have, as the Lord enabled me, done since I was a preacher, testifying against sin freely and plainly, and as earnestly as I could, by grace assisting me, though in weakness. And, Lord, thou knowest that my great desire is to catch men, and to get for that end my whole furniture from thee, laying aside my own wisdom. And if I could do this, how satisfying would it be to my soul that desires to do good to others, though I myself should perish? Therefore do I not spare this weak body, and therefore I have desired never to be idle, but to go unsent for sometimes. Yet my conscience tells me of much slackness in this point, when I have been in private with people, and have not reproved them as I ought when they offended, being much plagued with want of freedom in private converse. This I have in the Lord's strength resolved against, and have somewhat now amended it. Little Roman numeral number 2. It vents itself in indignation against sin in myself and others. Many times have I thought on that of the apostle, yea, what revenge? When I have been overcome by a temptation, being content, as it were, to be revenged on myself, and as it were, content to subscribe a sentence of damnation against myself, and so to justify the Lord in his just proceedings against me. And Lord, do I not hate those that hate thee? Am I not grieved with those that rise up against thee? The reproaches cast on thee have fallen on me, Psalm 69, verse 9. And my heart rises and is grieved when I see transgressors, that they keep not thy law. Little Roman numeral number 3. It vents itself in grieving for those things that I cannot help. Lord, thou knowest how weighty the sins of this land have been unto me, how they have lain and do lie somewhat heavy on me, and at this time in particular, the laxness of many enjoining with the people of these abominations, the unfaithfulness of some professors, the lack of zeal for God, and not making a more narrow search for the accursed thing in our camp. And now, when God's wrath is going out violently against us, and not making an acknowledgement of sins and renewing our national vows, according as our progenitors did, many, as it were, thinking shame of the covenant, of whom the Church of Scotland may be ashamed. Number 4, growth and motion is an evidence of life, Psalm 92, verses 12 through 14. I move forward toward heaven. My affections are going out after Christ and endeavoring to make progress in a Christian walk. I think I discern a growth of these graces in me. Letter A. A growth of knowledge and acquaintance with Christ, 2 Peter 3:18. I am more acquainted with Christ and his ways than before, though I not have such uptakings of Christ as I ought to have. Yet I have more than I have had in this respect sometimes before. Letter B, a growth of love. If my heart deceive me not, I have found love to Christ within this month more lively and vigorous than before, my soul more affected with his absence from ordinances than ever. Letter C, a growth of faith. I can, I think, trust God more now than ever before. I have had more experience of his goodness and knowledge of his name, and therefore think I can cast my burden on the Lord better than before. But it is easy swimming when the head is held up. Lord, increase my faith. I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. Letter D, a growth of watchfulness. I have felt the sad effects of unwatchfulness over my heart in times past. I feel the good of watchfulness now. My soul is habitually more watchful than before. Neither dare I give such liberty to my heart as sometimes I gave. Yet for all this, the Lord may well complain of me that he is broken with my wanton heart. But, Lord, thou knowest, it is also breaking to myself that it is so. Lord, seal these things to me. Letter E, a growth of contempt of the world, which, blessed be God, is on the increase with me. Secondly, following Christ implies a knowledge of the way that Christ took. No man can follow the example of another as such unless he knows what way he lived. So neither can any man follow Christ with respect to the catching of men in particular unless he knows Christ's way of catching souls, that is, so far as it may be followed by us. Acquaint then thyself, O my soul, with the history of the gospel wherein this appears, and take special notice of these things, that thou mayest follow Christ. What a sad case must they be in that are not acquainted with this. Thirdly, following Christ supposes a sense of weakness and the need of a guide. A man that knows a way and can do well enough without a guide needs not follow another. And surely the want of this is the reason why many run before Christ and go farther than his example ever called them, and others take a way altogether different from Christ's way, which is the product of their own conceited hearts and airy heads. But thou, O my soul, acknowledge thyself as a child in these matters, that cannot go unless it be led, as a stranger in a desert place that cannot keep their right way without a guide. Acknowledge and be affected with thine own weakness and emptiness, which thou mayest well be persuaded of. And of this end reflect seriously, number 1, on that word. Who is sufficient for these things? 2 Corinthians 2, verse 16. No man is of himself sufficient. Even the greatest of men come short of sufficiency. This may make thee then to be affected with insufficiency, who are so far below these men as shrubs are below the tall cedars, and yet they cannot teach it of themselves. Number 2, consider the weight of the work, even of preaching, which is all that thou hast to do now. It is the concern of souls. By the foolishness of preaching, it pleases the Lord to save them that believe. And, as thou thoughtest yesterday, January 22nd, 1699, before thou went to the pulpit, it may seal the salvation of some and the damnation of others. To preach of the Spirit in the power and demonstration thereof is no easy matter. Thy pitiful gifts will not fit thee for this. Number 3, reflect on what thou art when God is pleased to desert thee. How then thou tuggest and rowest, but it will not do, either in studying or delivering sermons. I think thou hast had as much of this as may teach thee to beware of taking thy burden on thy own soul, but to cast it on the Lord. See diary, June 3rd, July 3rd, December 31st, 1698, January 6th, 1699, and others. Number 4, consider what a small portion thou knowest of God. When thou art at the best, and when thou art in thy meridian, yet how low art thou, and how far short thou comest of what thou shouldst be at. Number 5, lastly, consider that though thou hadst gifts like an angel, yet thou canst not convert a soul unless Christ be with thee to do the work. Therefore acknowledge thyself a weak creature, insufficient for the work, and go not out in thy own strength, but in the name of the Lord. And so, although thou be put as a stripling, thou mayest be helped to cast down the great Goliaths that defy the armies of the living God. Fourthly, following Christ implies a renouncing of our own wisdom. It must not be the guide that we must follow. Matthew 16, verse 24. Paul would not preach with wisdom of words. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 17. He did not follow the rules of carnal wisdom. Therefore, O my soul, renounce thine own wisdom. Seek the wisdom that is from above. Seek to preach the words of the living God, and not thine own. Since thou wast most set to take this way, and prayed most that thou mightst not preach that which might be the product of thine own wisdom and natural reason, but that which might be given thee of the Holy Ghost, thou hast found that God hath signally countenanced thee. Take not the way of natural wisdom, follow not the rules of carnal wisdom. Its language will always be, Master, spare thyself. Have a care of thy credit and reputation among men. If thou speak freely, they will call thee a railer, and thy preaching reflections. Every parish will scare at thee as a monster of men, and one that would preach them all to hell, and so thou shalt not be settled. Such and such a man that has a great influence in a parish will never like thee. That way of preaching is not the way to gain people. That startles them at the very first. You may bring them on little by little by being somewhat smooth, at least at the first, for this generation is not able to abide such doctrine as that thou preachest. But hear thou and follow the rules of the wisdom that is from above. For the wisdom of the world is foolishness with God. That which is in high esteem among men is not in the sight of God. The wisdom that is from above will tell thee that thou must be denied to thy credit and reputation and the like. Matthew 16, verse 24, Luke 14, verse 26. It will tell thee, let them call thee what they will, that thou must cry aloud and spare not. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet. Isaiah 58, verse 1. It will tell thee that God has appointed the bounds of men's habitation. Acts 17, verse 26. It will tell thee that not many wise, not many mighty, not many noble are called. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 26. Whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, thou shalt speak God's words unto them. Ezekiel 2, verse 7. It will show thee rules quite contrary to those of carnal wisdom. Let me consider then what carnal wisdom says to me and what the wisdom from above says. Carnal wisdom. The body is weak, spare it, and weary it not. It cannot abide toil, labor, and weariness. Spare thyself then. Spiritual wisdom. Your body is God's as well as your spirit. Spare it not for glorifying God. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 20. In weariness and painfulness. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 27. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Isaiah 40, verse 29. And this thou hast experienced. Carnal wisdom. Labor to get neat and fine expressions, for these do very much commend a preaching to the learned, and without these they think nothing of it. Spiritual wisdom. Christ sent thee to preach the gospel, not with wisdom of words. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 17. Go not to them with excellency of speech or of wisdom. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 1. Let not thy speech and the preaching be with the enticing words of man's wisdom. That's verse 4. Carnal wisdom. Endeavor to be somewhat smooth in preaching and calm, and do not go out upon the particular sins of the land or of the persons to whom they preacheth. or the persons of whom thou preachest. Spiritual wisdom. Cry aloud and spare not. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet. Show my people their sins. Isaiah 58 verse 1. Open rebuke is better than secret love. Proverbs 27 verse 5. Study to show thyself approved unto God, rightly dividing the word of truth. 2 Timothy 2 verse 15. Carnal wisdom. If thou wilt not do so, they will be irritated against thee, and may create thee trouble. And what a foolish thing would it be for thee to speak boldly to such a generation as this, whose looks are very terrible. Spiritual wisdom. He that rebuketh a man afterwards shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue. Proverbs 28 verse 23. And I have experience of this. Fear them not, neither be afraid at their looks, for though they be a rebellious house, I have made thy face strong against their faces. Ezekiel 3 verses 8 through 9. And experience confirms this. Carnal wisdom. It is a dangerous way to speak freely and condescend on particulars. There may be more hazard in it than thou art aware of. Spiritual wisdom. He that walketh uprightly walketh surely. Proverbs 10 verse 9. Whoso walketh uprightly shall be saved. Proverbs 28 verse 18. Carnal wisdom. Thou wilt be looked upon as a fool, as a monster of men. Thou wilt be called a railer, and so lose thy reputation and credit, and thou hadst need to preserve that. Men will hate and abhor thee, and why shouldst thou expose thyself to these things? Spiritual wisdom. Thou must become a fool, that thou mayest be wise. 1 Corinthians 3 verse 18. We are made a spectacle to the world. 1 Corinthians 4 verses 9 and 10. The servant is not greater than his Lord. John 15 verse 20. And also 10 verse 20. He hath a devil, and is mad. Why hear ye him? If thou wilt be Christ's disciple, thou must deny thyself. Matthew 16, verse 24. If the world hate you, you know it hated me before it hated you. John 15, verse 18, says our Lord. Carnal wisdom. Great people especially will be offended at you if you speak not fair to them, and court and caress them. And if you be looked down upon by great people who are wise and mighty, what will you think of your preaching? Spiritual wisdom. Accept no man's person, neither give flattering titles to man, for in so doing thy Maker will soon take thee away. Job 32 verses 21 through 22. Few of the rulers believe on Christ. John 7 verse 48. Not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, and not many noble are called. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 26. Speak thou God's word to kings, and be not ashamed. Psalm 119 verse 46. Carnal wisdom. Our people are new come out from under prelacy, and they would not desire to have sins told particularly, and especially old sores to be ripped up. They cannot abide that doctrine. Other doctrine would take better with them. Hold off such things, for it may do them ill. It will do them no good. Spiritual wisdom. Thou shalt speak my words unto them, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are most rebellious. Ezekiel 2 verse 7. Give them warning from me. If thou do it not, they shall die in their sins, but their blood will I require at thy hand. Ezekiel 3 verses 17 through 18. What the Lord saith to thee, that do thou speak. 1 Kings 22 verse 14. Carnal wisdom. If you will preach such things, yet Prudence requires that you speak of them very warily. Though conscience says you must, yet speak them somewhat covertly, that you may not offend them sore, and especially with respect to them that are but coming in yet, and do not fill them with prejudices at first, you may get occasion afterwards. Spiritual wisdom. Cry aloud and spare not. Isaiah 58 verse 1. Cursed be he that doeth the work of the Lord deceitfully. Jeremiah 48 verse 10. Handle not the word of the Lord deceitfully. Peter at the first told the Jews that they were but coming in to hear. Him, Christ, ye have taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain. Acts 2 verse 23. Work while it is called today. The night cometh wherein thou canst not work. John 9 verse 4. Carnal wisdom. Be but fair especially to them that have the stroke in parishes, till you be settled in a parish to get stipend. If you will not do so, you may look for toiling up and down then, for parishes will scare at you, and will not call you, and how will you live? And so such a way of preaching will be better to your loss, whereas otherwise it might be better with you. Spiritual wisdom. To have respect of persons is not good, for a piece of bread that man will transgress. Proverbs 28 verse 21. The will of the Lord be done. Acts 21 verse 14. God hath determined your time before appointed, and the bounds of your habitation. Acts 17 verse 26. And his counsel shall stand. Oppose it, who will? Isaiah 46 verse 10. It is God that sets the solitary in families. Psalm 68 verse 6. If thou be faithful, thou shalt abound with blessings. But if thou makest haste to be rich, thou shalt not be innocent. Thus thou seest, O my soul, how that carnal wisdom, notwithstanding it speaks fair and with a good deal of seeming reason, is quite contrary to the wisdom that is from above. It promiseth fair, but its promises are not always performed. It threatens sore, but neither do its threatenings always come to pass. It makes molehills mountains, and mountains molehills. Therefore reject the wisdom of the world, for it is foolishness with God. Carnal policy would make thee fear him that can but kill the body, yea, that cannot do so much now, and to cast off the true fear of God. O my soul, remember that word, and make use of it for strengthening thee. The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. Proverbs 29 verse 25. Never go to seek temporal profit by putting thy soul in hazard, but wait thou on the Lord, and keep his way, and he shall exalt thee to inherit the land. Psalm 37 verse 34. For his way is the safest way. However, carnal wisdom speak otherwise of it, and may account the following of it mere folly. But remember thou that the foolishness of God is wiser than men. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 25. Fifthly, following Christ supposes that we must not make men our rule, to follow them any further than they follow Christ. Be ye followers of me, says the apostle, as I am of Christ. 1 Corinthians 11 verse 1. Wherein they follow Christ, I may follow them, but in nothing else. All men are fallible. The greatest of men have had their own spots. Luther's opinion of Christ's corporal presence in the sacrament affords a notable instance of this. Therefore, O my soul, let not man's authority prevail with thee to go off the road at all. If Christ himself tell thee not, O my soul, where he feedeth, thou mayest be left to turn aside to the flocks of his companions. Have a care of putting the servants of the Lord in his own room, but follow thou him.